Hello and thanks for joining me for this special edition. I'm Sarah Coates and we'll be live for the next hour bringing you all the updates from the situation on the ground as Russia continues its 19th day of the invasion of Ukraine. Well, here's what the last 24 hours have looked like.
Все, забрали.
Save us, children, please. Please.
And Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik joins us live now from Kiev. Kira, thank you very much for your time this evening. Firstly, tell us about the situation on the ground where you are.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for having me. So right now, just 5 minutes ago, the air raid siren went off because we had one of the major attacks on the Kiev city. It was like fireworks, except that they were not fireworks. Today, we had additional major Air Force attacks in the morning. So the Russian missile hit the residential building, 9-story building that buried under it 2 people and 8 injured. And then the Russian missile hit the bus. Thank God it was an empty bus. However, there were also casualties there. So it's definite that Russia intensifies its attacks on the peaceful cities and that its forces are getting closer to the Kiev, the capital where I'm located right now, and that they are executing on one of their 3 strategies. The first one is the siege, so to surround the city and then starve us out. Then second one is the straightforward ground attack. And the third one is just destroying and bombarding city to the ground like they did in Kharkiv, in Mariupol, and in Syria and everywhere else where they were fighting. So we are getting ready to all of these scenarios. We are getting ready for a siege, so we have enough supplies and we are preparing our troops. We are getting ready for a land attack, for the ground force attack, and we are making sure that Russians will not pass and they will face the resistance as we can give them the resistance. But there is nothing that we can do with the Air Force attacks. So there is nothing I can train with so I can stop the missiles going onto my home. Nothing I can do to stop all this bombarding happening to our cities. And this is why we have been continuously pleading NATO countries to provide us with a no-fly zone, jets, and additional weaponry. We know that no-fly zone is something that Western country already hate. But this is still the thing that we do need to be able to fight Russia back, to be able to make sure that there is no Russian invader on our land.
Kira, I'd like to know, as a member of the Ukrainian government, what are you hearing from Zelensky? What is the communication channel like between him and other members of the government?
So Zelensky stepped up to the plate and he is really doing very well. So we are getting ready to the next round of the parliamentary voting session, and there are a couple of legislation pieces that were created directly by him.
Tell me, another round of talks scheduled for tomorrow between Russia and Ukrainian delegations. What are your expectations here?
I do not have any positive expectations, and let me tell you why. After the first round of the peaceful negotiation, Russia bombarded the peaceful city of Kharkiv. Russia bombarded the TV station. After the second round of the negotiation, Russia bombarded the city, peaceful of Mariupol and the nuclear plant. After the third round of negotiation, Russia moved to the west and started bombarding western cities of Ukraine. So I'm honestly very afraid of what's coming after the fourth round of negotiation. Because in 8 years, In 8 years fighting with Putin, we learned only one thing, that the most scary word that you can hear from him is the word peace, because this word means war, because it means that there will be destruction. Putin doesn't want to end this war. He was very blunt about it. He said that he wants to fight NATO, and he is finding the ways to do it. And what I see as the most threatening piece right now, he's trying to bombard the nuclear plants. So if everybody's thinking that he will create like a nuclear crisis by pushing the red button, no, he will create a nuclear crisis by pushing the buttons on the planes where they are bombarding the nuclear plants.
And Kira, how afraid are you of the same thing happening all over Ukraine as has happened in Mariupol, completely taking over the local government there?
Well, they didn't take the local government. You know what's Russians' view of democracy? They think that they can kidnap a mayor, then put another person and say, here is your new mayor. But this is not how it works in the free countries. So nobody obeys to this new mayor, and people are just like making fun of it, and they are just disobeying, and they are just like not coordinating with him or her. And this shows you again like this huge difference between democratic countries and tyrannies. This is not how it works with us. And yes, we are very afraid in what was going to happen if Russia will increase its military and air force attacks on Ukraine. Unfortunately, again, we do need help from our NATO allies. We do need additional air force support so that we can finally push Russians back.
So, in saying that, in your opinion, is the world doing enough to help Ukraine?
World is doing a lot, but it is not enough to win. It is enough to continue war, but we don't want to continue war. We want to win this war, and this is why we would need more. We know that all the sanctions are supposed to work, but for them we need time, and we are buying this time right now with our own blood, with our own lives. So the sanctions would work, and hopefully Putin dies, and hopefully Russia gets internal instability. But right now we are saying explicitly what we need. We are saying this is what we need to fight them back. We are fighting so bravely. So help us please to execute on our plan, because we do have a plan. We plan to stand till the last person standing, till the last person fighting, and we will be protecting our motherland. And my question to NATO is, what is your plan? And for that, I didn't hear an answer yet.
How long are you expecting all of this to go on for?
Well, again, we plan to stand until the last Russian soldier is out of Ukrainian land. It's hard to say for how long it will take.
Yeah. All right. Kira Rudik, look, thank you so very much for coming on this evening. It must be extremely difficult. And, I'm really, really sorry you're going through all this. Thank you.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
All right. Meanwhile, Russia is accusing Ukraine of firing a cluster-charged missile into the breakaway city of Donetsk in the east of Ukraine, killing at least 20 people, including a child, accusing Kiev of committing a war crime. Well, Ukraine denying the claim, with its military spokesperson speaking during a televised address saying it's unmistakably a Russian rocket or another munition. There's not even any point talking about it. All right, we need to take you out for a very short break, but we'll continue our coverage of the situation on the ground in Ukraine when we come back. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the I-24 News Desk.
Now more details on a developing story.
Breaking news at this hour.
It is history in the making.
When news breaks in the Middle East and around the world, our team of experienced journalists are here, around the clock.
To keep you up to date with the news of the day.
Where it happens, when it happens.
Stay tuned and stay informed.
Every day on the hour.
The heart of the new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
Imagine being able to see into the future.
What innovations will change the world as we know it? Join us as we meet the people changing our planet and discover the inventions shaping tomorrow.
Israel Business Beat, Sundays and Wednesdays, 9:30 p.m. GMT.
Breaking news again. But there's always more to the story, especially here in the Middle East.
What's really going on in the region? Well, unless you're actually here, you can't really tell.
Join us here at the beating heart of the new Middle East
To get a true perspective on what's really going on.
All right, thanks for staying with us. Let's now take you live to New York, where we're joined by journalist Lucy Westcott, who's also the emergency director at Press Freedom. Lucy, thank you for your time this evening. Look, we saw just yesterday the extreme danger journalists are up against in the field in a war zone like this, with the tragic death of Brent Renaud, and we're now hearing that a Fox News journalist has also just been injured. You know, when there's no protection on either side, just how can they work to stay safe?
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for having me this evening and giving me the opportunity to talk about press freedom. So at the Committee to Protect Journalists, we stress that journalists are civilians under international humanitarian law. They must be protected as such. All sides in this conflict need to respect the role of journalists and to keep them safe. The tragic death on Sunday of Brent Renaud was the second confirmed killing of a journalist in this conflict. And he was, of course, with a photographer, Juan Arredondo, who was injured in the incident as well. The first journalist who was confirmed killed was cameraman Yevgeny Sakhin, who was killed in a shelling of the TV tower in Kyiv at the beginning of the month. When we think about safety in a conflict zone, there are a few things that the Committee to Protect Journalists stresses, and we have some of this information on our website that you can visit at cpj.org. Personal protective equipment in this conflict and in any conflict is key to keep you safe. We also stress the need to do a risk assessment, to plan out your coverage. Conflict zones, wars, they are unpredictable scenarios, and it's best to plan as much as possible. Knowing the lay of the land, knowing which sides are where, having exit strategies are also crucial to keeping journalists safe.
And, you know, every war correspondent from a network has a fixer, a local on the ground who can speak the language and, as you said, you know, knows the lay of the land. But, you know, with the media landscape like it is these days, Lucy, a lot of journos are forced to get there on their own. How difficult is it for them to gain access to, let's say, trusted sources when they have to do it all off their own back, really?
Sarah, that's a great question. And fixers, you know, and freelancers in any kind of conflict zone are, of course, they face a different kind of risk. As you say, freelancers are often doing this on their own. They often lack that traditional newsroom support. Yeah. Many international news crews have safety advisors with them on the ground. They have really robust security teams. freelancers don't always have that. One thing the Committee to Protect Journalists stresses is that reporters, wherever they are, but especially in a conflict zone, should not be reporting by themselves. And ideally, if you are a freelancer on the ground, linking up with other freelancers is just a really good way to keep yourself safe.
And look, it can be really difficult for some reporters who've been desensitized after seeing so much horror throughout their career. You know, do you believe they're put in, let's say, an even more risky position, maybe not pulling out when they should or could?
So when you're covering conflict or any kind of high-risk environment, there are, of course, mental health challenges that might come with that. It totally depends on the journalist. We stress that if journalists feel that they are in a very dangerous situation, that their safety comes before the story. Of course, it totally depends on the journalist, on the newsroom. We hope that, you know, when we think about safety, CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, always sees safety in 3 overlapping buckets: physical safety, digital safety, and psychosocial safety as well, or that mental health aspect. So we stress that journalists, editors, newsrooms consider all aspects of their safety when reporting on this crisis.
And you know, many of these people they're seasoned journalists. They've covered conflict after conflict. Of course, there are fresh journalists on the ground there as well. You know, do you see this conflict as being any different to what we may have seen, let's say, in the last decade or so?
So it's difficult to compare conflicts. It totally depends on the country. It depends on the situation. But what I can say is that war reporting, conflict coverage is one of, if not the most dangerous assignment a journalist can undergo. We have seen 2 journalists killed already in the first few weeks of this conflict. We know of other journalists who have been injured. So we stress the need for good preparation, for having that safety equipment with you, and for going in with the expectation that, you know, you are prepared and you know how to do this properly.
And, you know, we're seeing all these horrific images, Lucy, you know, played out on our screens of people that have been wounded, of pregnant women, hearing pregnant women, you know, who've lost their babies and their own lives. Journalists are supposed to remain neutral in their reporting, as we know, but how do you remain neutral and report a story properly when you're witnessing all of this horror? How do you stay sane?
It's a great question, Sarah. And I think when you are in that situation, you're focused on the task at hand. And the task at hand is this: you are showing the world what is happening in Ukraine. You are showing the world what happens to civilians in a conflict, in a war zone, and to everyone in a war zone, of course. So I think the focus is on doing the job of a journalist.
Yeah.
And it's a privilege, really, to be able to tell the world what is happening.
Lucy Westcott, look, thank you so very much for your time this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Take
Pleasure.
care.
Now, with Kiev bracing itself for an expected Russian ground assault, Ramzan Kadyrov, the leader of Russia's Chechnya region, an ally of President Putin, said on Sunday that he joined his troops amassing outside the Ukrainian capital. Now, while the statement hasn't yet been verified, it could signal an escalation in Russia's offensive. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran has more.
As the Russian onslaught continues across Ukraine, Moscow's troops are slowly but surely edging closer and closer to Kyiv. And Chechen strongman Ramzan Kadyrov announced he's arrived at the doorstep of the Ukrainian capital. A video posted by Chechen TV shows the Russian president's self-proclaimed foot soldier being briefed by his troops after an operation they conducted roughly 4 miles west of Kyiv. The apparent target, kidnapping Ukrainian children.
We decided not to purge the village, but rather to swiftly approach the orphanage. We went inside, but unfortunately the children were not there. It appears we just missed them. The beds were still warm.
While the date and location of the video weren't stated, it joins multiple other videos shared on Kadyrov's social media channels showcasing the Chechen forces advancing across Ukraine.
Вау, вот это их там очень много.
Like this one, supposedly of a Chechen special unit headed by a Kadyrov henchman near Mariupol in the Donetsk region. Or this, purportedly of Chechen fighters seemingly helping locals hunkered down in a bomb shelter. But not everything is going smoothly for the forces from Russia's semi-autonomous region. An aide to Ukrainian President Zelensky said that Moscow's spies in the FSB are leaking the whereabouts and movements of Chechen kill squads, resulting in their elimination. Meanwhile, Russia continues to pummel Ukrainian cities. And many people on social media are already comparing the images of destruction coming out of Ukraine to those from Chechnya, where Russia killed thousands of civilians and laid waste to entire cities in the 1990s and early 2000s. Now, with the separatist Chechens turned loyalists fighting alongside Putin, it raises fears of similar scorched earth tactics being used once again against civilian populations.
Now, rumours of Syrian mercenaries joining Russian forces have been circulating for some time now. Well, over the weekend, Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed the issue for the first time, not admitting that Moscow is actively recruiting, but saying they'd help fly volunteers to the combat zones who wish to join the fight. Well, Middle East correspondent Alec Pollard has more.
Are these Syrian fighters heading to Ukraine to fight for Russia? The Russian Defense Ministry shared these images after a meeting of Russia's Security Council in which President Vladimir Putin approved the recruitment of 16,000 volunteers from the Middle East.
If you see that there are people who want to join on a voluntary basis, especially those not in it for money, to come and help people living in Donbass, you need to meet them halfway and help them move to the combat zones.
Putin's decision came after many speculative and conflicting reports about Syrians joining the fight, such as Russia offering 6-month contracts to Syrian fighters for as little as $200 a month, or the Kremlin-affiliated Wagner militia group recruiting in Syria. The Wagner group may even be recruiting Africans.
Face au nationalisme ukrainien, nous, soldats africains, nous sommes prêts à aller auprès de nos frères russes pour aller les soutenir. Mes frères russes, tenez bon.
But these videos may just be Russian propaganda. U.S. intelligence claims that so far at least, the presence of mercenaries fighting for Russia, if it exists at all, is negligible. On the other hand, thousands of volunteers are already on the ground fighting not for Russia, but Ukraine, such as this Georgian soldier whose video from the front lines went viral. The prospect of Ukraine turning into a full-on proxy war with thousands of fighters from across the globe is certainly scary, leading perhaps to even more destruction.
Now, as the war approaches its third week, some Ukrainians are returning home from abroad to assist. Well, here's a story of an Israeli part of the effort.
In this Ukrainian battlefield, an Israeli paramedic is hard at work. Michael Ratinsky, at the tender age of 56, has decided to leave Israel, his home since he immigrated from Ukraine for the last 21 years, and join his friends in defending his homeland.
I am an Israeli, but most of my life I lived in Ukraine. This is my motherland. So when I watched this war starting, I realized that I could be useful there. I could not leave behind my childhood friends to fight without me.
Ratinsky is one of an estimate of over 20,000 individuals from 52 nations, having volunteered to join the Ukrainian armed forces resisting the Russian invasion, perhaps the most notable volunteer effort since the international brigades during the Spanish Civil War.
It's important to say that the world has not understood for a long time what is going on in Ukraine. Now many, including the Israeli government, are still not doing enough. I try to compensate through my help, according to my abilities, for the lack of action on the part of the Israeli government.
Born and raised in Kharkiv, Ratinsky is fairly familiarized with the regional politics of Russia and Ukraine.
One of the reasons I came here is because of what Russia has come to be under Putin's leadership. So when it directly affected Ukraine in 2014, I realized I could not stand doing nothing. That's why I traveled in 2014 to help Ukraine, and that's why I traveled now as well.
Ratinsky, among the rest of the foreign volunteers, pose a threat to the Kremlin. So much so that the Russian Defense Ministry said on March 3rd that any foreign volunteer taken in Ukraine will not be accorded prisoner of war status, but will be treated as lawbreakers accountable for their own acts. There were even hints they could be executed. But Ratinsky is undeterred.
We are the mobile unit for intensive care. Our mission is to bring the wounded from the field treatment area to the hospital staff.
Even though the Russian army outweighs the Ukrainian army in quantity, Ratinsky and his fellow soldiers claim that the morale of the Ukrainians compensates for their shortage of troops.
And our coverage continues.
These images haven't been seen in Europe for decades, but now they have become Ukraine's daily reality. As Russia wages war against the Ukraine, our correspondents are on the ground, on the streets, in cities, on the border. Ukraine under fire. Special coverage only on I-24 News.
We're on the inside of political and religious passions in Jerusalem, breaking down the financial trends shaping the global economy, giving you key context, not just headlines. With the stories from Israel that touch the U.S. and those across the region with impact far beyond its borders. Sunday to Thursday on I-24 News. Catch the rundown, where the Middle East meets the world.
Today I'm making what we call tasbih, a mix of two Israeli staple dishes, falafel and sabich. Sabich is a sandwich based on a traditional Iraqi Jewish dish made for a Shabbat breakfast. It's made of eggs and eggplant, and in the past, it was served on a plate. Israel is a melting pot of different ethnicities, which create an interesting fusion cuisine. Falafel comes from Egypt and sabich is Iraqi, but both were adopted as Israeli dishes. Sabich came much later, but falafel has been around since the early 50s. We're in Netanya, a city in central Israel. This place is called Tovas Falafel, named after my grandmother who opened it in the 50s. Back then it was just a small stand selling falafel with tahini. In the mid-90s, my older brother and I decided to embrace this heritage and to kick it up a notch. We added a couple of dishes. We make everything ourselves. The pita bread, the falafel balls, the special salads. It's all homemade. Ever since this place opened, I remembered my mother feeding the less fortunate. Sometimes people who arrive here are short of money. I can't turn my back on those hungry people, so I let them eat for free. I'm pretty sure 20% of our customers don't pay, and I'm blessed to be able to allow that. Feeding people is not about making money. There's much satisfaction in it.
Welcome back. Well, nearly 3 million Ukrainians have fled their homes since the beginning of Russia's invasion, waiting for hours in packed cars and trains, racing to cross the border. They're leaving their lives behind and entering the unknown. Well, Amalia Roy breaks down where Ukrainian refugees are heading and what policies await them.
Countries around the world are welcoming Ukrainian refugees with open arms. But then what? European countries as a whole have opened their doors to Ukrainians seeking refuge, with the EU offering the Temporary Protection Directive, granting protection to large numbers of refugees, including giving them working permits, healthcare, and education.
The EU should be there immediately, and we should act together. And I'm so proud that all the member states, all the 27, could actually agree unanimously to activate the Temporary Protection Directive.
Poland began granting asylum to Ukrainians who came after the invasion, allowing them to stay in the country for up to 18 months with an option to extend up to 3 years, even able to receive unemployment benefits if they can't find work. Other countries are offering similar policies, like Romania raising money for housing costs and Hungary offering cash allowances and basic necessities refugees may need. Looking outside the EU, the United Kingdom has launched a new scheme, pairing British host families with Ukrainian refugees to live rent-free for at least 6 months. Under this new plan, the UK says there will be no refugee caps. They'll have access to public services when they arrive, and can stay in the country for up to 3 years. This comes after the UK had come under fire for its lagging response to the worsening refugee crisis with its complicated visa process. Leaving Europe, Israel has opened its doors to thousands of Ukrainian refugees. There's no limit for Jewish refugees or those eligible for citizenship under the law of return, but entry is capped at 25,000 for refugees who are not eligible for citizenship nor have relatives already living in the country. This policy has been a source of controversy both in and out of Israel, with Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked being criticized for setting too low a cap.
I suggest to all of those who are angered and criticize our policy, go to Terminal 1. Watch how we welcome here hundreds of new immigrants every day. Today alone, 450 people who escaped the battles will arrive. Those eligible under the law of return have also fled the battles. We absorb them, we naturalize them. No other country is dealing with so much immediate absorption.
Other developed nations, such as the United States and Canada, have signaled that they will welcome Ukrainian refugees with open arms. Thousands have been granted asylum in the U.S. since Russia's invasion of Crimea in 2014.
And Danish journalist Yotam Confino joins me here in studio. Good evening, Yotam. Thank you so much for coming in. Look, we're seeing a massive tide of people really streaming out of Ukraine and into these other countries there. You know, it's really highlighting the hypocrisy of other wars, you know, when refugees weren't welcome, facing so much scrutiny, you know, compared to those, you know, say from the Middle East or North Africa.
Yeah, I think it's not even comparable, to be honest. Those two situations are so different. What we see right now in Europe is basically countries lining up to take in refugees from Ukraine. They're all almost competing to be the most humanitarian, to open their borders, to make exemptions, to create new laws that they created back when the Syrians were coming to push them out, basically. Now they're reversing some of those laws. It's two different situations, and I think some of the things that we forget is that the Syrian refugees are still in Europe. And they're still dying in the Mediterranean. According to the UN, 20,000 refugees from Middle East, from North Africa, died in the Mediterranean. 20,000 people. It's staggering. And those numbers, it's something we don't discuss it anymore. Now we have a different situation. Ukraine is the backyard of Europe. It is Europe. And now all of a sudden, everyone is welcoming them. It is a complete U-turn, and you see it all over Europe. You see it among right-wing leaders. You see it among the liberals. Everyone is united, basically. So obviously, it's great news for refugees coming from Ukraine. But the Syrians and some of the experts that have been following this, they call it hypocrisy.
And, you know, given that, to what extent are they being used politically, you know, both positively and also, on the other hand, negatively?
We have so many recent examples of how refugees are being instrumentalized here, politicized, really. If you could just go a couple of months back to Belarus, the border with Belarus and Poland, you had thousands of refugees coming from Iraq mainly, with the dictator Lukashenko basically using them as a weapon against the Polish government because they didn't want to include them or take them in.
Yeah.
So you had an insane situation with thousands dying on the border.
And we all saw
nobody
these
did anything.
images.
We
there.
saw the images.
Yeah.
That's just one example. You go to Turkey, different example. Erdogan, which is, the leader of Turkey that hosts more than 3 million refugees from Syria. He has deliberately used the refugees as a weapon, as a bargaining chip against the Europeans. And he said it many times. If you don't do what I want, if you don't play according to my rules, I'm going to flood Europe with refugees. So it's highly instrumentalized. It really is, and it's everything we're seeing now only backs that up. Really.
And you're originally from Denmark. The country has been known to be hostile to refugees. How is it reacting now to these Ukrainian refugees?
Same story.
Yeah.
They are reversing laws. In 2016, Denmark, they basically came up with a new law specifically for the Syrian refugees that was called the jewelry law, which meant that anyone who comes as a refugee, you can basically take their valuables, if they have any, to make sure that they aren't there on a vacation, so to say. Now they are reversing that law. They're making an exemption so it doesn't apply to Ukrainians because Ukrainian refugees, they have a lot of valuables. They don't want to take it. So the Ukrainian refugees right now can enter Denmark on a 3-month tourist visa. And they are right now trying to make sure that they have they're accessible to hospitals, that they can go to school, all of the things that the Syrians weren't able to do. So they are welcoming them now. The prime minister is with open arms saying, come here, we are ready for you. And Denmark is also sponsoring military equipment to the Ukrainian military.
And what about on the Danish street? How are people reacting there?
It's also, Ukrainian flags. You have people going in cars to the Polish-Ukrainian border right now to help them come back, to drive them basically from the border. You didn't see that with the Syrian refugees. If anything, you saw them lining up on the highways in Denmark and people spitting on them. Obviously, this is just an example. It's not to say that all Danes are racist or anything, but there's such a big difference. It is clear, and it's almost become a sport now in Denmark and other countries to say that you're pro-Ukrainian and that you will welcome your refugees, which is great. There's nothing wrong with it. You have to remember, not too long ago, it was a very, very different situation, and it still is. Really.
And what about, though, we've spoken about the people and these general sort of policies. What about these far-right politicians? How are they reacting?
I think that's probably the most staggering example. You have the most far-right parties in Europe, including in Denmark, saying, we're ready to welcome you. You even had the former Danish immigration minister saying, let's just be honest. We prefer the Ukrainians over the Palestinians and the Syrians because we have more in common with them and because they're Christian. Let's be honest. That's the Danish former immigration minister. Eric Zemmour, the far-right French leader. He wants to be a leader.
Yes.
He's also saying he's ready to include Ukrainians in France. And he's a guy who has built his entire party on being anti-immigration, anti-refugees. All of a sudden he has to reverse this because he sees the trend in Europe and he has to play into those hands.
Exactly. What an absolutely shocking situation. And, just fairly briefly, can we expect Denmark to sort of cap the number, or is anyone welcome?
I think anyone is welcome. Really, that's my guess. I don't think that they'll be starting to kick out Ukrainians at any moment.
All right. Yotam Confino, it's always lovely to speak to you. Thank you so very much for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, and we're out for a very short break, but we'll continue our coverage of the situation on the ground in Ukraine when we come back. Don't go anywhere.
Esta semana en News 24, mientras la atención está puesta en la invasión rusa a Ucrania, en Viena, Irán está a punto de firmar un acuerdo que la convertirá en potencia nuclear. Entrevista a Daniela Roystein, nos cuenta su experiencia durante su visita a Israel y nos habla del Chile que se viene con el presidente Boric. Los medios de comunicación judíos como la radio y la TV subsisten con grandes dificultades. Miki Steuermann, director de Radio High, analiza la relación entre Israel y la diáspora. News 24, el magazine semanal en español de i24 News.
Strictly Security, your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts, analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays, only on i24 News.
This Wednesday, March the 16th at 9:30 p.m., my guest in Mallard at Large will be Salome Zorabishvili, the President of the Republic of Georgia.
Mallard at Large with Christian Mallard this week on i24 News.
Welcome back. Well, China and Russia see each other as partners, but both also know the true nature of their relationship is more complicated. And of course, the war in Ukraine just raises the stakes. Senior international affairs correspondent Owen Alterman looks at how China may see opportunity out of this crisis.
The motorcades came and went at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Rome. Behind closed doors Monday, a warning from the United States to China about the consequences to China if it decides to help Russia get out from under Western sanctions. As both Beijing and Moscow batted away claims by U.S. officials that Russia has sought Chinese military aid too.
Recently, the U.S. has been spreading successive disinformation, targeting China on the Ukraine issue, with malicious intentions.
It's military assistance from China, not from Washington. It was written by the various newspapers. The newspapers write a lot nowadays.
The reports and Monday's meeting get at one of the central questions about the Ukraine war and beyond. How will China position itself? On one hand, China likes how Russia challenges the United States, likes how Russia keeps the United States tied down in Europe, and so away from Asia. On the other hand, China doesn't like the economic disruption of the war and the sanctions that threatens China's economy as part of the global economy.
The current situation in Ukraine is indeed worrying. Utmost efforts have been made to support Russia and Ukraine in overcoming difficulties and carrying out ceasefire negotiations to achieve a peaceful result.
There is for China a good destination. Position Beijing as Moscow's patron. Make Russia dependent on China. Use the enormous leverage China has. Escape route for the world's 11th largest economy to gain Russian assets and commitments. Russian President Vladimir Putin will not like playing junior partner. China hopes he has no choice.
And Ryan Fedosuk, who is a fellow at the Center for New American Security, joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Ryan, thanks for your time. Look, firstly, I want to ask you just how concerned should the U.S. be?
Well, thanks very much for having me. And, you know, I think the United States is right to be worried, but the challenge presented by China's involvement in this war, I think, is manageable. If you look at what's reported to have been asked by Russia, it's really military aid, especially in the form of drones, and short-term economic relief. When it comes to drones, we know that the Russian military already has pretty robust drone capabilities. Russia already operates the Orlan 10 and the Granat series of UAVs for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, which are really designed to scout the area, report adversary movements, and then call in locations for strikes. Now, one area where this could go awry is with China's CH series of Rainbow UAVs. These are heavier duty and analogous maybe to an MQ-9 Reaper operated by the United States. Those could, for example, help getting control of the airspace and take down Ukrainian-operated TB2 combat drones. But at the end of the day, the Ukrainians are already fielding a lot of counter-drone systems that might pretty easily dispense with a platform like the CH-5 Rainbow. When it comes to economic aid, I think that in the short term, the digital yuan is unlikely to make much of a difference in this case. And there's not really much China could do to stabilize the Russian economy in the short term. The level of damage that Russia has suffered is simply unprecedented. And so I really don't think they could finance military operations in the near term very easily.
So in your
area,
given that, in your opinion, what is the timeline then until China gets involved with the conflict?
I think it's a little early to say. National Security Advisor Sullivan met with Yang Jiechi today for 7 hours in Rome. So I think there's still a lot to talk about. But the fact that U.S. policymakers are talking about this possibility with the press, I think is evidence that Beijing may have already decided to intervene. Now, one point I'm watching is that yesterday, Lo Pengyu, a spokesperson for the Chinese embassy, said he had not heard of this request from Russian officials. So I do think they're buying time. But once a decision is made in Beijing, we should expect to see weapon shipments begin almost immediately.
And, by siding with China and potentially India, Russia will create this gigantic union on the European continent. Do you think, and maybe NATO and the EU are creating a really dangerous enemy on their own hands, just really briefly?
I think a decision by China to aid Russia's war in Ukraine would be a betrayal of its own commitment to act as a responsible great power. I think leaders in New Delhi know this too. Aside from India and China, the United Arab Emirates was the only country to abstain from a UNSC resolution condemning Russia. And in fact, the only countries that rejected a resolution at the General Assembly were North Korea, Eritrea, and Syria. So I'm not too concerned about that partnership.
All right, Ryan Fetters-Suk there joining us live from DC. Thank you very much for breaking that down, and have a great night.
You too.
Well, moving on, and the EU has approved a fourth round of sanctions against Russia and will target economy and individuals. Well, since its invasion of Ukraine, Russia's become the world's most sanctioned country, topping Iran and North Korea. Now, with hundreds of international companies pulling out of Russia, the measures are starting to be felt, but only for some. Well, there are locals, as our correspondent reports, who seem to be unfazed and instead see the benefits.
A picture of emptiness and both mass market and luxury brands suspended in Russia. The sanctions against the country rippling throughout the global economy. This Massimo Dutti shop sign reading in Russian, "Do not open without administration sealed." Here's another, this sign saying, "Dear customers, the shop is temporarily closed due to technical reasons." And over 800 stores with the iconic golden arches no longer selling burgers in Russia. But could it all weaken the system? This Russian economist thinks the effects aren't as grand for Russia's economy and market.
These brands' withdrawal has no severe impact, for they are not major products.
Delyagan even going as far as saying that McDonald's suspending its operations in Russia will leave more market share to local brands. But on the whole, these locals are really feeling the sting.
What can I do about the rising prices? I can only live with it and earn more. Unfortunately, I can only adapt myself to it.
I don't even know what to expect because the consequences can be unpredictable.
While some other locals are mulling over the ramifications.
We don't care about sanctions. People with large bank deposits or some real estate abroad need not to worry about the sanctions.
Meanwhile, joining other firms in suspending sales in Russia, French luxury giants Chanel, LVMH, which owns Christian Dior, Dior and Givenchy, plus Kering, which is home to Gucci and Yves Saint Laurent, and Hermes. And in the last few days, even more companies across a range of industries, from ExxonMobil and General Electric to Netflix. What's also disastrous is the effect on global bulk commodities.
The impact from major supply distribution is very severe. Then there will be sharp increases in the price of energy. Then even worse, the price of food grain will also go up sharply.
The economic and financial sanctions leveled, causing major disruption mostly to Russia's remotest regions, like in the Far East, the Kamchatka Peninsula. Here, people are panic buying staples because supplies are only delivered by air in winter.
We've made an extraordinary decision to impose restrictions because people started to hastily buy groceries. Customers purchased the average monthly amount of sugar within just 2 days between the 6th and 7th of March.
Will the sanctions work? Well, for those imposing them, nothing is taboo, nothing is forbidden either, until and unless Russia halts its invasion.
Meanwhile, a group of people calling themselves anarchists have taken over a London residence believed to belong to Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, who has stakes in a major extractives and energy company, rolling out these banners and flags saying this property's been liberated, adding it will be used to house refugees. Well, it comes after Britain froze Deripaska's assets last week, identifying him as a person close to Vladimir Putin. Well, as millions of Ukrainians flee from their homes to safety, many have been forced to leave their beloved pets behind. Shelters in neighbouring countries are working around the clock to rescue defenceless animals injured in Russia's invasion. Here's more.
This is Moon. She is a survivor of war. Medically, what is wrong with her? Is she sick?
Yes, she's sick. She is in bad condition.
She's dehydrated.
Okay.
She's scared. She has lots of problems, pancreatitis, maybe worms. She also has a tumor that needs to be removed. But at least she's alive, rescued from a shelter in Ukraine after the war began. She's not aggressive, or she's just letting you do what she needs you to do. It's okay, sweetie. This veterinarian must poke and prod her to find out just how sick she really is. Everything is in this dog's ear. Dirt, wax.
We must clean this ear for 7 days.
7 days. You have to keep doing this. The staff at the Ada Foundation treats these dogs as their own. It is a no-kill animal shelter in Przemysl, Poland. Hundreds of animals from war-torn Ukraine are being cared for here. The humans have not slept much since the war began in neighboring Ukraine. They are just a few miles from the Polish-Ukrainian border. The staff has been driving into war-torn Ukraine to save truckloads of shelter animals and pets people simply couldn't carry across the border. In another room, more animals, different war stories. This is Sasha. Oh. And she's from Ukraine. A baby goat brought from Ukraine with legs that needed mending.
So we made this bandage, and we feeding him, and we must give him warm and peace and a lot of love.
Here you go, boy. Sleepy baby. Sasha is a newborn, just 7 days old. You can tell, because he tries to nurse on my earlobe, biting down when no milk comes out. Oh. The doctors say without the care he got here, he would have starved to death if left alone in Ukraine. She would die if she wasn't here, basically.
He got
or he would die. He would die if he wasn't here.
He would die.
The son of Ada Foundation's founder tells us Sasha was dropped off here by a woman after she escaped from Ukraine into Poland, but had nowhere to take him. But she left one instruction. She will be back to get him. She loves him. he's family.
And I think owner, this lady, loves so much this animal. This animal is
family, no? Part of the family, no?
Yes, a part of family, and we want back when war will end.
This is a family affair. His daughter has been giving Sasha the love and warmth he needs. These are just 2 animal war stories of hundreds, and more arrive every week. And every week, these animals get top-notch care. To the staff here, these war refugees are as important to care for as the humankind. Sarah Seidner, CNN, Przemysl, Poland.
And that's all our coverage this evening, but our team here at I24 News is continuing to bring you all the latest on the Russia-Ukraine situation, so do stay tuned. We'll be seeing you again tomorrow, but for now, good night.